The kitchen was quiet, save for the sound of the refrigerator door opening and closing with a soft, unnerving creak. It was a routine so familiar that it almost felt normal except for the girl standing there clutching a crumpled napkin, her small fingers trembling with fear as they clutched the fabric tightly. She was trying not to cry. She was trying so hard, but it wasn't working. She could feel the cold eyes of her stepmother on her back, like a weight pressing down on her spine, ruthless. Sharp as ice, her stepmother's hands gripped the edge of the counter, as if to steady herself, but to anyone watching it, looked like she was preparing for something much darker. "You think this apology means anything?" The stepmother's voice sliced through the silence like a knife, her words dripping with venom as she spoke. The girl didn't dare look up. She just stood there, her face flushed with shame. The girl's eyes were fixed on the ground, her heart pounding in her chest. She was used to the cruel comments and the harsh stares, but this felt different. This felt like something more was coming, something that would tear her apart. "I don't want your apologies," the stepmother sneered, her voice growing louder as she took a step forward. "I want respect." She reached over to the counter, grabbing the milk carton with a speed that made the girl flinch. The world seemed to slow down in that moment. As the stepmother twisted the cap off the milk bottle, the sound of the milk splashing against the sides of the container echoed in the small room. It was almost as if the noise was a warning, but the girl didn't understand it yet. And then it happened. The milk hit her chest in a cold, wet burst that shocked her system like a slap. She gasped as the liquid poured down her body, soaking through her shirt and staining the fabric in a matter of seconds. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the look on her stepmother's face, the way her eyes gleamed with satisfaction at the sight of her humiliation. The way the woman stood there, so confident, so sure of herself, as if she had the power to break the girl with one simple act of cruelty. The girl stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. She could feel the coldness of the milk seeping into her skin, but the sting of her stepmother's words cut deeper than anything physical. She opened her mouth to say something, anything to defend herself, but no words came out. The lump in her throat was too tight, her body too weakened. Then the door creaked open. The sound broke through the tension in the room like a thunderclap, making the girl snap her head toward the doorway. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw him there, the millionaire, her father, standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock and fury. The sight of him should have brought her relief, should have made her feel safe, but instead it only made her feel smaller, as if all eyes were now on her and the mistake she had made. The millionaire's eyes locked onto the scene before him, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. The girl's stepmother stood with her hands still raised, the milk dripping down her arm as she stared at the man with an expression of cold defiance. And then he shouted, "Stop!" His voice rang out like thunder, shaking the walls of the house, shaking everything inside the girl's chest. It was a command, a warning, the kind of voice that made everyone in the room pause for just a moment in fear. But the stepmother didn't stop. Instead, she slowly lowered her hand, her face contorting into an unreadable expression as she turned to face the millionaire. She wasn't afraid, she wasn't intimidated, not in the least, but the girl could see it, the small flicker of doubt in her stepmother's eyes, the crack in her armor that the millionaire's anger had caused. The millionaire stepped forward, his expression dark and full of rage, as he made his way into the kitchen. He was a tall man, his presence commanding, but it wasn't just his size that made him intimidating. It was the raw power in his voice, the way he carried himself like a king whose throne had been challenged. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The stepmother didn't answer. Instead, she glanced at the girl, her eyes narrowing with something that could only be described as hatred, before she turned back to the millionaire. "I'm teaching her a lesson," the stepmother said coolly, as if the girl were nothing more than a piece of furniture in the room, by humiliating her. The millionaire's voice was sharp now, a crackling edge to it. The girl wanted to say something, to explain, to tell him that it wasn't her fault, that she hadn't done anything wrong, but she couldn't. She could only stand there, frozen and soaking wet in front of both of them. The stepmother's lips curled into a tight smile. "She needs to learn her place," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The millionaire's eyes flashed with anger as he stepped closer to her, his words coming out in a low hiss. "And you think this is the way to teach her?" The girl watched them both silently. She had never seen her father like this before, never seen him so angry, so protective. Of her, she had always known him to be distant, to keep his distance from her. But this was different. But it wasn't just his anger that shook her. It was the guilt that flashed in his eyes as he looked at her, the regret, the realization that he hadn't been there for her, not like he should have. The room was silent for a long moment, save for the soft drip of milk hitting the floor. The stepmother's smug expression faltered as she met the millionaire's gaze, and for the briefest of moments the girl saw the crack in the woman's armor. The fear that she might actually lose control over everything. But the fear didn't last long. The stepmother's expression hardened again, and she squared her shoulders as if preparing for battle. "I don't need your help," she spat. "I can handle this." But the millionaire's next words silenced her completely. "No," he said, his voice firm and final. "You're done here." The girl's heart skipped a beat as the weight of his words sank in. What did he mean? Was he really going to do this? The stepmother's face paled as she took a step back, her lips trembling with fury. "What?" she hissed. "You heard me," the millionaire said, his gaze never leaving her. "You're done with my daughter." The girl's breath caught in her throat as she tried to process what was happening. She had never heard him speak like this before, never seen him stand up for her, not like this. But what happened next was even more shocking than anything she could have imagined. The millionaire's next words would change everything forever. The stepmother's face twisted in disbelief as she took another step back, her eyes widening with a mix of anger and fear. She had never seen him like this. Not ever. The millionaire was standing there, his posture unyielding, his words ringing with an authority she couldn't ignore. It was as if everything she had thought she knew about her place in this house was suddenly unraveling before her eyes. The girl stood frozen, her body still drenched in the milk, the coldness sinking deeper into her skin with each passing second. But it wasn't just the milk that made her feel chilled, it was the silence that followed her father's words. It was the way her stepmother looked at him with such venom, as if she was trying to figure out if he really meant what he had just said. "You can't just throw me out," the stepmother finally said, her voice tight, trembling with barely contained fury. She took another step back, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. Her eyes flicked from the millionaire to the girl, who was still standing there in shock, trying to understand what was happening. "I think you'll find that I can," the millionaire replied, his tone cold and final. He wasn't shouting now, but his words carried the weight of something far stronger. It was a command, a decree that no one could challenge. The girl couldn't move. She couldn't process the fact that this was happening. She had always known that her father didn't truly care about her, not the way a father should, but this was different. He was standing up for her in a way she had never expected, a way she hadn't even dared to dream about. The stepmother's face contorted with rage as she opened her mouth to speak again. But no words came out. She was too stunned by the sudden shift in power, too overwhelmed by the reality of what was unfolding. "You'd think you can just walk in here and dictate what happens," she finally managed, her voice trembling with both fury and fear. Her eyes were wide now, searching the millionaire's face for any sign that he would back down, but he didn't flinch. He didn't even blink an eye. "Think you've already shown me what kind of person you are," the millionaire said, his gaze hardening. "And I've had enough of it." The girl's heart was pounding in her chest. She wanted to say something, to speak out, and tell her father that she didn't want this, that she didn't want to be the cause of all this drama, but she couldn't find the words. She couldn't bring herself to speak, not when everything had changed so suddenly. The stepmother was still glaring at them both, her lips pulled into a tight, angry line. She was trying to hold on to whatever power she had left, but it was slipping away faster than she could manage. "You're making a huge mistake," she spat, her voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," the millionaire said, his voice unshakable as he stepped closer to the stepmother. "And I'm not going to let you destroy her anymore." The girl's eyes darted from her father to the woman who had tormented her for so long. She had always thought the stepmother was untouchable, always assumed that the woman's cruelty would be the thing that defined her life. But now, it seemed like everything was changing in an instant. The stepmother didn't say anything at first. She just stared at him, her chest rising and falling as she fought to maintain some semblance of control. But the control was slipping, and they both knew it. "This is your last chance," the millionaire said, his eyes narrowing. "Leave now, before I make this permanent." The stepmother's expression faltered for the briefest of moments. She hesitated, her lips parting as though she wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the kitchen, her footsteps heavy and filled with rage. The sound of the door slamming behind her echoed through the house like a final punctuation to the argument. The girl stood there, still in shock, still soaked in milk, her heart racing. She didn't know what to feel. She didn't know how to process the fact that her father had just stood up to her stepmother, that he had defended her, protected her. in a way she had never expected for a moment. The only sound in the room was the steady thud of her heartbeat as it echoed in her ears. The girl was still trying to wrap her mind around the events that had just unfolded. She didn't know if she should feel relieved or terrified. She didn't know if this was the beginning of something new, or if it was just a temporary reprieve before everything went back to normal. And then she felt his presence beside her. Her father stood there, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. His touch was warm, comforting, but there was something else in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was something deeper, something that had been buried for far too long. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice softer now, regret seeping into every word. "I should have done this a long time ago." The girl turned to look at him, her heart aching at the sincerity in his voice. She had never heard him speak to her like this before, never heard him acknowledge the years of neglect, the years of her pain. She had always felt like a shadow in his life, a nuisance he tolerated, rather than a daughter he loved. But now, for the first time, she saw something different in his eyes. He wasn't the same man who had ignored her, who had let her suffer at the hands of her stepmother. He was someone else, someone who finally realized the truth about what was happening to her. "I didn't know," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't know what she was doing to you." The girl's chest tightened as she fought to hold back tears. She had wanted this for so long, wanted him to see her, to understand her pain, but hearing the words now made everything feel so raw, so exposed. It was like all the years of silence had come rushing to the surface, and she didn't know how to handle it. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible as she wiped away a stray tear. But her father shook his head, his hand still on her shoulder as he looked down at her with a mixture of regret and guilt. "No, it's not okay," he said, his voice hoarse. "I've failed you, and I'm going to make it right. I promise you." That the girl looked up at him, her heart swelling with something she couldn't name. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him for the years of hurt, but in this moment, she felt something different, a glimmer of hope, that maybe things could be different now. Maybe they could start over. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite understand. Her father squeezed her shoulder gently, and for the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't alone. The house was eerily quiet after her father's promise, the stillness heavy with an unspoken tension that clung to the air like dust after a storm. The girl sat at the kitchen table, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes staring down at the napkin she had crumpled earlier. Her father had left her for a while, retreating to his office to take care of some matters, but she couldn't shake the feeling that things had just changed forever. Her mind kept racing, replaying the scene in her head over and over again. The milk, the humiliation, her father's anger, the stepmother's retreat. They were all flashing through her thoughts like a series of disconnected images, too jumbled to make sense of, but too important to ignore. She could still hear the echo of her father's voice in her ears, the way he had shouted at her stepmother as if he was ready to tear the world apart if it meant saving her, and that look in his eyes, the way he had looked at her when he apologized. It wasn't the look of a man who had failed, it was the look of a man who had finally realized what mattered. But the girl wasn't sure if she was ready to believe it. She wasn't sure if she could trust the sudden shift in his behavior, the way he had suddenly stepped up after all this time of indifference she had spent so many years feeling. Abandoned by him, left in the shadows of a marriage that had seemed perfect to everyone except her. Her father's new actions felt like a foreign language, something she couldn't quite understand, no matter how much she wanted to. But there was something in her, a flicker of hope, that told her maybe, just maybe, things could be different now. Maybe this was the start of something real. But as she sat there, the doubt kept creeping in, the nagging fear that it wouldn't last, that it was just a momentary act of defiance before everything fell back into its old patterns. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps approaching the kitchen. Her heart skipped a beat, and she looked up to see her father standing in the doorway, his face serious but not angry. He wasn't in a suit this time, just a casual shirt and pants, looking more like the man she had always known him to be. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. The girl hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this conversation, but something in his voice made her believe that this was important, something that couldn't be ignored. He walked into the kitchen and sat across from her, his eyes never leaving hers, as if waiting for her to speak first. "I don't know what to say," the girl whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "You've never done this before." She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "You've never stood up for me like that." Her father's eyes softened as he leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. His voice was steady as he spoke, but there was a vulnerability there that she hadn't seen before. "I know," he said quietly. "I know I've been absent, distant. It's been hard for me too. I've been so caught up in my work, in everything else, that I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. I didn't see you." The girl's breath hitched at his words. She didn't know how to respond to that. She wanted to be angry, to lash out, to demand answers for all the years of neglect, but part of her, the part that was still trying to heal, wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this could be the beginning of something better. "But I see you now," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I've seen how she's treated you. I've seen the toll it's taken on you, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't realize it sooner." Tears stung at the girl's eyes, and she fought to hold them back. She didn't want to cry. Not now. Not in front of him. Not when things were just starting to change. She had spent so many years holding everything in, pushing the pain down so deep that she thought she might never be able to feel anything again. But now, with her father's apology, with his recognition of the hurt she had carried for so long, it all came rushing to the surface. "Why now?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of everything she had been holding in. "Why, all of a sudden? Why did it take something like that to make you see what was happening?" Her father's eyes darkened, and he leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair as if trying to gather his thoughts. "I don't have an answer for you," he said, his voice low and filled with regret. "I don't know why I waited so long to see it, to be honest. I was afraid of what might happen if I confronted her. I was afraid of losing everything." The girl's heart twisted at his words. She had always wondered why he had never stood up for her, why he had always let his wife control everything, even their family. She had thought that maybe he didn't care, that he had chosen her over his own daughter. But now, hearing him admit his fear, she realized how much he had been hiding from her. "He should have done something sooner," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I needed you." Her father looked away for a moment, as if ashamed of what he had allowed to happen. But when he looked back at her, there was a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I know," he said firmly, "and I won't make the same mistake again. I promise you that. From now on, I'm going to do everything I can to make things right. I'm not going to let her hurt you anymore." The girl felt a flicker of hope in her chest, but it was quickly replaced by doubt. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But the scars from all those years of neglect were still fresh, still so deep that she didn't know how to move forward, how to trust him again. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can believe you." Her father's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "I understand," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I can't undo what's been done, but I can start making it right, one step at a time. Will you let me do that?" The girl looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of insincerity, any trace of the man who had abandoned her for so long. But all she saw was the man who had just promised to fight for her, to protect her from the woman who had tormented her for so long. And, for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of something like hope. "I'll try," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll try to trust you." Her father smiled, a small, fragile smile that held so much meaning in it. "Thank you," he said softly. "I won't let you down." I swear. Days passed, but the girl's mind couldn't seem to quiet down. She kept replaying everything that had happened, the way her stepmother had stormed out, the way her father had stood up for her for the first time in years. It was as though a part of her was still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the truth to come crashing down and shatter the fragile hope she had begun to feel. She had spent so many years being invisible to him, feeling like she didn't matter, like she was just an afterthought. That the sudden change in her father's behavior was both comforting and terrifying. It was like he was trying to rewrite everything, but she didn't know if she could trust him, didn't know if she could believe in his promises after all this time. Every time they spoke, she felt like there was something unsaid between them, something neither of them could bring themselves to acknowledge. But maybe that was okay. Maybe this was their chance to start fresh, to build something new from the broken pieces of their past. But then came the day when everything changed again, when the reality of their situation hit harder than ever before. It was late in the afternoon when the doorbell rang, an unfamiliar sound in the quiet house. The girl was in the kitchen, preparing a snack for herself. When she heard the chime, it was a sound she had come to associate with bad news, with disruptions that would ruin her peace and turn her life upside down. She froze, her hands stilling as she stared at the door, her heart skipping a beat. She wasn't sure why she felt so uneasy, but she knew something wasn't right. She could sense it in the air, the tension, the unease that seemed to crawl through the house like a living thing. A moment later, she heard her father's footsteps approaching, his heavy boots echoing through the hallway. She could tell by the sound of his steps that he was agitated, that something was about to happen, something she wasn't ready for. Stay here. Her father's voice called to her from the doorway. His tone was tight, like he was trying to keep something under control, but failing. Don't come out. The girl didn't have to be told twice. She knew that whatever was happening was something she shouldn't witness, something that might ruin the fragile peace they had fought so hard to create. She sat down at the table, her hands trembling as she stared at the window, her mind racing with all the possibilities of what could be happening. She didn't know why, but she had a sinking feeling in her gut, a feeling that something was coming for them, something they couldn't fight off. Minutes passed, each one stretching out longer than the last. Then she heard the door open, the faint murmur of voices, and the unmistakable sound of her stepmother's voice rising, sharp and cutting through the air. Her heart pounded as she stood up, her curiosity getting the better of her. She crept toward the door, inching closer with each step, trying to make sense of the voices, of the argument that was unfolding just beyond the door. You can't do this. Her stepmother's voice was loud and filled with anger, laced with desperation. You don't have the right to throw me out like this. I have every right. Her father's voice was calm but resolute, the kind of voice that brooked no argument. You've done enough damage to my daughter. I won't let you continue to hurt her. The girl's heart skipped a beat as she pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear more. She wanted to go in, to see for herself, but something kept her glued to the spot. She wasn't ready to face this. Not yet. Not when everything was so new, so fragile. You don't know what she's capable of. Her stepmother hissed, her voice filled with venom. She has been manipulating you, twisting everything to get what she wants. The girl's breath caught in her throat at her stepmother's words. She had never heard anyone speak about her like that before, never thought that anyone would actually believe those lies. But the fear in her chest was immediate, overwhelming, as she realized that her stepmother was willing to say anything to keep her control over the household. I know exactly what she's capable of. Her father's voice was steady, unwavering, and I know that she needs me more than you do. The girl didn't know what to do with those words, how to process the raw truth that was spilling out between them. She wanted to believe him, but part of her was still scared, still afraid that he might say one thing and do another, that he might back down, like he always had before. You're making a huge mistake, her stepmother said, her voice trembling with emotion. You can't just throw me away like this. I'm the one who's been here, who's taken care of everything while you've ignored your own family. Don't pretend you've ever cared about anyone other than yourself. Her father shot back, his tone bitter, sharp. You've never cared about her, about what she's been going through, and I'm done pretending you have. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. The girl couldn't hear anything, not even the sound of her own breath. It was like the world had frozen around her, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then she heard the stepmother's voice, quieter now but filled with a new kind of menace. You think you can just replace me with her? Her words were cold, calculated. You think you can just throw away everything we've built together for some little girl who's been nothing but trouble from the start? The girl's heart sank as she heard the words. Her stepmother's hatred for her was so clear, so pure, that it almost seemed unreal. She wanted to believe that her father would protect her, that he would keep her safe, but the doubt was there, creeping in, filling the empty spaces in her mind. I'm not throwing anything away, her father said, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. But I am choosing to fight for my daughter, and if that means losing you, then so be it. There was a long silence, a stillness that felt like it could last forever, and then, finally, the girl heard the door slam shut, followed by the sound of her father's footsteps growing distant. She stood frozen for a moment, unable to move, unable to breathe. She wasn't sure what had just happened, what had been said between them, but she knew that things had just changed again, and this time, it felt like they were changing for good. She didn't know if her father would truly follow through on his promise, or if he would back down when things got hard. She didn't know if the peace they had fought for could survive the weight of everything they had yet to face. But in that moment, standing in the stillness of the house, she felt a spark of something new, something she hadn't felt in years. She felt seen, felt heard, felt like she mattered, and for the first time in a long time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could finally be free from the lies, From the pain, maybe this was the beginning of something better. The days following the confrontation felt like a strange blur. Like the calm before the storm, the girl tried to settle into a routine, to find some kind of normalcy in the chaotic shift of everything that had just happened, but the house still felt tense, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Her father had kept his distance, and so had she, though she couldn't tell whether it was because he was giving her space, or because he was afraid of what would happen next. They had spoken only a few times since the confrontation, and each time it was like stepping into a new chapter that neither of them could fully understand. She was still unsure if this was the new version of her father, the man who would protect her no matter what, or if it was just a momentary change brought on by guilt, by the shock of seeing his own daughter suffer. But deep down, she couldn't shake the sense of fear that this was all too fragile to last, too delicate to be real. The stepmother, on the other hand, had been quiet, but there was something about her silence that made everything feel worse. It wasn't just her absence, it was the feeling that she was still there, looming in the background, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back, to reclaim control of everything she had lost. The girl spent most of her time in her room, thinking about everything that had happened, about the broken promises, the missed chances, the years of feeling invisible, of feeling like nothing more than a burden to her father. But now, with him finally showing some kind of support, she was torn. She wanted to believe in the change, in the man he was trying to be, but she couldn't let herself fall into the idea that he would always be there for her. And then, one evening, the phone rang. The girl wasn't sure why, but something in her gut told her that it was going to change everything. She had a feeling that the calm they had found was just a momentary illusion, a brief pause before everything spiraled out of control. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her father's office door slightly ajar down the hallway. The phone was on the counter, and she stared at it for a long moment, wondering whether she should pick it up, whether this was the moment everything would change again. Her father walked in just as the phone rang again, his face looking tired, drawn as if he hadn't slept properly for days. He stopped short when he saw her staring at the phone, his expression shifting to one of concern. "Should I answer it?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. She could feel her heart beating faster, the way it always did when something important was about to happen. Her father hesitated before nodding, the tension in the air thickening between them. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady but with an underlying tension. "It's probably for me." The girl picked up the phone, her fingers trembling as she lifted it to her ear. She didn't know why she felt so nervous, so anxious to hear whatever news was on the other end of the line, but something told her that she wasn't going to like it. "Hello," she said, her voice small and tentative. The voice on the other end was calm, controlled, but there was a hint of something dark underneath it. "It's me," said the voice, the stepmother. "I need to speak to your father." The girl's stomach dropped, and she immediately turned to her father, her eyes wide with concern. She could tell from the look on his face that he didn't want to speak to her, that he was reluctant to reopen that door, to let her back in. But before he could speak, the girl found herself handing him the phone. Her instincts told her to do it, that there was something urgent on the other side of that call, something that couldn't be ignored. Her father took the phone from her with a resigned sigh, his face hardening as he pressed it to his ear. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice sharp, more forceful than before. There was a brief silence before the stepmother spoke again, her voice soft but carrying a sense of authority that made the girl shiver. "You don't get to just throw me out and expect everything to be fine," she said, her words like poison. "I'm still married to you, and I'll make sure you regret this decision." The girl couldn't hear the rest of the conversation, but she could see the way her father's expression changed, the way his body stiffened, and it filled her with dread. She knew something was coming, something that they weren't ready for. Her father's voice grew low, quieter, as he spoke again, but this time, it was filled with determination. "If you're planning to make this a fight, then we'll fight," he said, his voice full of quiet anger. "But I'm done with you treating my daughter like she's nothing." The girl's heart raced as she watched him, unsure of what would happen next. She had never seen him like this before, so focused, so intent on standing up for her. But even now, even with him finally showing her this side of himself, she couldn't shake the fear that everything would fall apart again. "You're making a big mistake," the stepmother warned, her voice low but filled with menace. "I'll make sure you regret this, you'll see." Her father didn't respond right away. He just stood there, his jaw clenched tightly, his eyes narrowing with something that looked like resolve. "We'll see who regrets this," he muttered under his breath, the words barely audible but filled with an intensity that shocked the girl. The phone call ended soon after, and the girl could see the change in her father's demeanor. The way his shoulders sagged with the weight of the conversation that had just transpired. He didn't look defeated, but he didn't look like the man who had been so sure of himself just hours ago. What happened? The girl asked, her voice tentative, unsure whether she really wanted to know the answer, but needing to ask all the same. Her father looked at her, his expression weary, but there was something in his eyes that made her pause. He looked almost like a man who had been through something difficult, something that had left a mark on him. "She's not done yet," he said, his voice heavy with the realization she's not going to let go of this so easily. She'll do whatever it takes to get what she wants. The girl felt a knot form in her stomach as she looked at him, the gravity of the situation finally sinking in. She had hoped, she had wanted to believe that everything was going to be okay, that this time would be different, but now it felt like they were standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the inevitable fall. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "I don't want to lose everything again." Her father's gaze softened, and he moved closer to her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You won't lose me," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I'm not going anywhere, not this time." The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with doubt, but also with something else, something that resembled trust. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this time things would be different, but she knew, deep down, that the battle was far from over, and she was scared that it might tear them both apart. The days that followed the phone call were filled with a sense of mounting tension, the kind that builds slowly in your chest until it feels like you're drowning in it. The girl could feel it in the air, in the way her father seemed more distracted, more withdrawn, as if he was preparing for something he couldn't quite explain. To her, she tried to ignore it, to focus on the quiet moments when they were together, when he would look at her with that softened gaze and promise that he wouldn't let her down. But every time she saw him look away, every time his eyes shifted to something in the distance, she couldn't help but feel that the storm was still coming, still waiting to destroy everything they had barely begun to rebuild. She spent more and more time in her room, away from the tension in the air, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Her father's sudden shift, her threats, the broken pieces of her life that she couldn't seem to fit back together. The walls of her room felt safer than anywhere else, even though she knew she couldn't hide forever. And then, one evening, the knock on the door came. The girl had been sitting at her desk, looking out the window, when she heard a soft tap at the door that sent a chill through her spine. She didn't want to answer it. She didn't want to know who was on the other side, but she knew, deep down, that she couldn't avoid it anymore. Her father's footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, deliberate. He didn't say anything as he reached for the door and opened it, but the girl could hear the conversation before the door was even fully open. "Why are you here?" Her father's voice was low, his words sharp, filled with a kind of anger that she hadn't heard in a long time. The girl could hear the tension crackling through his voice, and it sent a wave of dread through her. She didn't need to know what was being said to know that this was the moment everything would change. The girl stood up, walking to the door, trying to steady her breath, trying to keep her heart from beating out of her chest. She needed to see it, to understand what was happening before it all slipped through her fingers. When she stepped into the hallway, she saw the stepmother standing there, her arms crossed, her face a mask of controlled fury. Her father was standing just behind her, his back stiff, his face hard, as if he was trying to keep his composure. "I'm done with this," the stepmother said, her voice smooth, calculated. She didn't look at the girl, didn't acknowledge her presence as she spoke to her father. "I'm done with you. With this house, with everything you've promised me. You think you can just walk away from all of it, like I'm nothing." Her father's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He just stood there, his expression unreadable, as though he was weighing every word that came from her mouth. Every threat she made. The girl felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. She had known this was coming, known that her stepmother wouldn't just let go of everything so easily, but hearing the venom in her voice, seeing the anger in her eyes, made it real in a way that made her stomach twist. "I won't leave quietly," the stepmother continued, her voice low, threatening. "I'll make sure this isn't over. I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are, what you've really done to me." Her father's hand clenched at his side, his fist tight with restrained rage. "Go ahead," he said, his voice steady, but there was something in it, a promise, a threat of his own. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The girl's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to speak, wanted to tell her father to stop, to not engage with her stepmother, but her words wouldn't come. They were stuck, frozen, in her throat, and she was too scared to say them out loud. "You think you can take everything from me and not suffer the consequences?" the stepmother asked, her eyes narrowing as she turned to the girl for the first time, her gaze cold and malicious. "You're nothing but a tool to him. You think he actually cares about you? He's only protecting you because he's guilty. He's trying to make up for all the years he didn't care." The girl felt the sting of those words, the weight of the truth behind them. Even though she knew they were lies, she didn't know if her father really cared about her, not in the way he should. But the way the stepmother spoke made it feel like her entire world was unraveling once again. Her father stepped forward, his voice rising, filled with anger but also with something else, a kind of finality that made the girl stop in her tracks. "I've made my choice," he said, his words unwavering, filled with a conviction she hadn't heard from him in years. "And you're not part of it anymore. You've done enough. You've hurt her enough." The stepmother's lips twisted into a smile, but it wasn't a smile of victory, it was a smile of malice, one that promised something far worse than anyone could imagine. "You think this is over?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can just get rid of me and everything will be fine? You're wrong. You'll regret this. I promise you that." With that, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking on the floor as she made her way to the door, leaving a trail of destruction behind her. The girl watched her go, feeling like she had just witnessed the end of something, but she couldn't tell if it was the end of a chapter or the end of everything she had known. Her father stood there, silent for a long moment, before he finally turned to her. His face was pale, his eyes tired, but there was something softer in his gaze now, something that hadn't been there before. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low, filled with a kind of relief that she couldn't quite place. The girl swallowed hard, trying to process everything that had just happened. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that it was truly over, but the weight of everything they had been through still hung heavy in the air. "I don't know if I can believe that," she whispered, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't know if I can trust that everything will be okay." Her father's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently rest on her shoulder. "It will be," he said, his voice steady, filled with determination. "I'm going to make sure of it. We're going to start over. I promise you." That the girl looked up at him, her heart heavy with doubt, but there was a small flicker of something in her chest, something that felt like hope. She didn't know if everything would truly be okay, but in that moment, with her father standing there, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild their broken world together. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that things could be different. The end.